Love Rekindled, A Murder to Remember. Chapter 1, The Fading Flame. Sue and John Henderson had been married for nearly 15 years. Theirs was a love story that began with passion and excitement. They met at a mutual friend's wedding, where John was the best man, and Sue was the maid of honor. From the moment their eyes met, they felt an undeniable connection. The wedding was the start of something beautiful, and soon, they were planning their own. The first few years of their marriage were blissful. They traveled together, shared dreams, and built a life that seemed perfect. But as time went on, the spark that once ignited their relationship began to fade. Life's daily grind, responsibilities, and the monotony of routine had slowly worn away the magic. Their conversations became brief, filled with the necessities of life rather than the laughter and love that once flowed so naturally. Sue often found herself reminiscing about the past, wondering where things had gone wrong. John, too, felt the distance between them growing, but neither of them knew how to bridge the gap. They had settled into a routine of quiet discontent, each unsure of how to reignite the flame that once burned so brightly. One rainy evening, as they sat in their living room, the silence between them was deafening. The sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the void where their voices should have been. Sue glanced at John, who was engrossed in the evening news, and sighed. She missed the days when they would talk for hours about anything and everything. Now, it seemed they had nothing to say to each other. John, Sue finally spoke, breaking the silence. John looked up from the television, surprised by the sound of her voice. Yes? Do you ever wonder what happened to us? How we ended up like this? John turned off the TV and faced her, his expression softening. I think about it a lot, Sue. I miss how we used to be, but I don't know how to fix it. Sue nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I miss it too. I miss us. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared sadness hanging heavy in the air. But before either of them could say more, the phone rang, interrupting their moment of vulnerability. John reached for the phone and answered it. Hello? John? It's Detective Miller, came the voice on the other end. John frowned. Detective Miller was a friend of John's from their college days, but they hadn't spoken in years. Detective Miller? What can I do for you? I'm afraid it's not a social call, John. There's been a murder, and I could use your help. John's heart skipped a beat. A murder? What does that have to do with me? It happened at the Pinewood Resort. The victim was one of the guests, and the circumstances are unusual. I know you and Sue have been there before. I could use your insight. John glanced at Sue, who was watching him with concern. Give me a moment, he said into the phone before muting the call. He turned to Sue, his expression serious. It's Detective Miller. There's been a murder at Pinewood Resort, and he wants our help. Sue's eyes widened in shock. A murder? At Pinewood? That's where we spent our honeymoon. I know. He thinks we might be able to help with the investigation. Sue hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Maybe this is what we need, John. Something to shake us out of this rut. John considered her words, then unmuted the phone. We'll be there, detective. Just tell us what you need. Chapter 2: The Return to Pinewood. The next morning, Sue and John packed their bags and set out for Pinewood Resort. The drive was filled with a mixture of emotions, nostalgia, anxiety, and a strange sense of anticipation. As they approached the resort, memories of their honeymoon flooded their minds. The place hadn't changed much in 15 years. The quaint cabins nestled in the woods, the serene lake, and the cozy lodge all looked as they had when they first visited. But as they drove up the long, winding road to the resort, the air felt different. There was a tension that hadn't been there before, a sense of foreboding that hung over the place like a dark cloud. They arrived at the resort and were greeted by Detective Miller, a tall man with graying hair and a serious expression. John, Sue, thank you for coming, he said, shaking their hands. Of course, Detective, John replied. But we're not sure how we can help. Let's go inside, Miller suggested. I'll explain everything. They followed him into the lodge, where the atmosphere was tense. Staff members and guests whispered in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at the couple as they passed by. It was clear that the murder had shaken everyone. Miller led them to a private room where they could talk. The victim's name was Emily Warren, he began. She was a young woman, here on vacation with her fiancé. They were supposed to get married next month. Sue's heart sank at the thought of a life cut short so close to what should have been a joyful occasion. How did it happen? She asked quietly. She was found in her cabin yesterday morning, Miller replied. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. But there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. It's as if someone knew her, someone she trusted. John frowned. And you think we can help because we've been here before? Partly, Miller said. But also because this case, it's strange. The staff said that Emily had been acting strangely the day before she was killed. She seemed nervous, like she was being watched. I need you to talk to the guests and staff, see if you can find out anything that might help. Sue and John exchanged a glance. They were far from professional investigators, but they couldn't deny that the situation intrigued them. Perhaps this mystery was exactly what they needed to rekindle the connection they had lost. We'll do our best, Sue said. Miller nodded. Thank you. I have a feeling you're going to be more help than you think.